All right, Joe Casey with Casey Aviation. I'm glad to have you join us on the Malibu Guru podcast and the Casey Aviation YouTube channel. And I've got a fun guy here named Darwin Haines. Darwin's been training with us for how many years?
About 3 years.
About 3 years now. And man, I'm glad to have you here because, you know, if you look back at the Malibu Guru podcast, you were like on number 3 or something. And when I was just thinking, hey, this podcast would be kind of fun to make, and you were around, and I did like a really terrible episode with you. You know, as far as, so we get to redo it and do something better.
Well, we'll see about that. But yeah,
we'll see.
It was good fun then. I don't know how it
was good fun then. Yeah, we'll see. But it's better now. I mean, we got like video.
Amazing studio.
We've been working hard to make the studio look good. And again, throwing out Armando and Jill Navarro, and with Floors Unlimited here in Lufkin, Texas. They helped us out a gob. They work all over the country and they just do all kind of neat stuff. And here we are with cool table, cool settings, and Armando and Jill helped us out with that.
Very good.
Cool stuff. Okay, so tell me, man, how, you know, in the PA-46 world, you've gone from, hey, that looks cool, to buying a Mirage, to now you're instructing just about, I don't know, every month you're doing something. It may be more than that.
Yeah. It's averaging 1 or 2 a month, I think.
Yeah, 1 or 2 a month. Are you enjoying it? I guess what I want to talk about on this one is being a CFI. How are you enjoying being a CFI in the PA-46 world?
I love it. Actually, it's I've had the chance to do a number of things in the last 3 years, and a couple of them included jets, and I enjoyed that. It was interesting and fun. But considering it was never my intention to be an instructor in anything aviation related, you know, coming to it relatively late in my life, in my aviation second life, after I thought I was done, it's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever encountered.
Yeah, just being being a CFI in the PA-46 world.
Being a CFI, certainly, but in the PA-46 world, it's been a real treat, and it's a treat because the airplane's a cool airplane. There's enough different about it, the different variants, that it's intellectually stimulating, and you always have something to learn. But also the people that fly them are interesting, amazing people. You meet them from all walks of life. They're doing all sorts of things with the airplane, sometimes for pleasure, sometimes for work. But it's fun to see them use their airplane, get better, more proficient, more comfortable with their airplane, and then, you know, hopefully enjoy it even more after we've had a chance to spend some time together.
Right. Okay, so tell me, when did you become a CFI?
March 2021.
Yeah, so kind of, I mean, this is sort of a like...
Yeah, later in life.
And talk about the why behind that.
Well, the why was when I retired from my business career in 2018, and we were still going back and forth to New York, my wife's work. We live in Michigan, Southwest Michigan. And one of the things I wanted to do when I retired was kind of get back into flying. So I joined a small flying club there. Was flying barely enough to stay current, let alone proficient. I wasn't doing much with it really until the pandemic, and then we were back in Michigan full time for an extended period of time. And in the meantime, our club, the one CFI that we had, moved on to another job and wasn't available anymore. And we borrowed 1 or 2 from the local community, and you know, what little work we had for training was more or less taken care of, but we had some new members come in, students, and they wanted to learn. And so I thought, well, I've got a little time. I was by this time flying a lot more, and decided that I would pursue being a CFI.
Yeah. And talk about that. Here's the point, that there's a whole bunch of listeners to the Malibu Guru podcast that are not CFIs right now. They're looking for a way to increase their credentialing or increase their ability to help other people in aviation to become a better pilot. Talk about being a CFI and how it's made you better.
Well, first of all, I think if you're somewhat conscientious about your professional life, wherever that may stem from or originate or what you do, then you're going to want to present yourself in a positive way, and you're going to want to present the material in a positive way, and you're going to want to make sure that what you're saying is correct. And if it's not correct, and if you don't know the answer, I think something I learned very early in my professional career was, You can't BS a BSer. So you just say, good question, let's go find out. And that can itself become the learning opportunity. Where do you find it? How do you find it? How do you find it efficiently? So, I think that's something that you should not, as I'm on that, be afraid of. It happens. You don't have to know everything. There's a lot to know.
Right.
But the point is, you're going to teach somebody. Most of us are going to want to understand it first, and that's going to make us better. We're going to improve our own knowledge level. We're going to improve our own skill level, and we're going to learn it as we deliver it. And we're going to deliver the same material to two different people, and we may have to deliver it a slightly different way.
Right.
Because that connection between sender and receiver, responsibility of both parties. The sender has to figure out a way to get it through to the receiver.
And not everybody has the same background. I mean, take today. I flew with Scott Smith. I don't know how many hours he's got, but it's way over 20,000. And flies 747-800s. Flew in the Air Force for a career prior to that. Comes to me with his jet prop. I am going to train him differently than I train a person that's got 500 hours and just moved into a Mirage or whatever. It doesn't even matter what airplane. Those two people, they come to this equation of, hey, I need to do a recurrent or an initial, whatever. You're going to do those two people very, very differently because they bring into the equation, into that training opportunity, completely different backgrounds that make them more different to train.
Different to train. And, if we wanted to add value to every event, first of all, I want to make sure that we deliver the knowledge that is needed for that event. But also, I always try to come up with, what is one thing that I can show them or teach them that they didn't already know? And that's going to be different for somebody like Scott Smith.
Right. You look at Scott, and we did his training. There's one area that I really emphasized, and that was engine outs. He flies a jet prop. We don't have hardly any engine failures in jet props. I mean, there's probably been 4 over the span of the jet prop. There's been 2 of them in the last 5 years that I know of that are that truly was an engine failure type of scenario. So I definitely trained the engine out. But the reason why I trained it with Scott is because he flies a 747. The engine failure in a 747 scenario is a completely different game than in a jet prop. And he never in his real life flies a engine out where he was flying patterns way further out. So I had to bring him in. You do an engine failure, you're going to be very, very close to the runway. You're not doing that from a 3-mile wide left downwind. It's a different way of looking at it. And so for him, that was a totally different training event. If somebody comes from an airplane like, let's just say a 182, where they're going to fly a very tight pattern, then they may need to fly out just a little bit different. Everybody comes in with a different way. And that's one thing that I find fun is that there's not a exact same day every day in the PA-46 world as a trainer, because you got to figure out who these people are and what brought them to this place in life, and this place where you get to spend some time with them and teach them in the way that they can actually receive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what makes it exciting and fun. And I do other CFI work. I instruct in the club, and I help people discover flying and get their private pilot's license, and then encourage them to grow beyond that. But the reward that I get from this work is, I'd say, on a different level.
Okay. Talk to me about, because there's some people out there that are thinking about being the CFI, and I hate to hammer down on this, but I really do want to get this. What's the best part of being a PA-46 instructor?
Hearing the words, I didn't know that. Because it's usually associated with something that may save their life, or certainly make the impact of something bad happening less. So seeing that, you kind of getting the nod and saying, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. That that's what I seek to do every time.
Right.
Regardless of who, whether and I've had a couple $300 pilots that I've either bought into or bought one turboprop and a couple Mirage, and so it's a little easier to get that from them, but it's also the guy that's been flying, for 15 years, that flew Caravans and other turboprop airplanes. And go, oh, I didn't know that. That's why I do it.
I agree 100%. I think it's so valuable. Now let me flip the question around. What's the worst part of being a PA-46 instructor?
That's like an interview question.
It is.
I can't think of a bad thing, but and it actually does have it has a very attractive other side of that coin too. But one is you just never know what you're getting, right? And I've never, it's probably been close to 600 or 700 hours of instruction in various PA-46s to include, M600 and Meridian. And I've never had a moment where I was nervous or scared, really. There were a few where I was paying very close attention, but you just don't know. You don't know the airplane. You don't know the pilot. And on the flip side, you get to figure out the airplane and you get to know the pilot. So it's one of the best things about it, but also the one thing that I want to step into that casually. And if anybody's listening who had a chance to meet and instruct, if it felt like an interrogation, not the intent, but we want to draw out of them their experience, what they're trying to get out of the training. And sometimes it's just, I just need the training. Well, okay. But there are people that are very thoughtful about that too. And they have objectives that go beyond the syllabus. And that's what we try to unlock. But in the course of understanding that, I get to understand a little bit about how they approach flying in general and how they approach the airplane and whether what they want to do with it and how they want to get there. And that really sets the foundation for the interaction.
Right. Do you perceive this as a third act? In other words, military was an act of yours, business world, second act, this third act?
Strictly speaking, I'm retired, but my family doesn't agree with that description. So it is definitely I've kind of called it my third career. Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of a third career. Okay. Talk to me about your wife and tell me what she thinks about you being a CFI and what it takes for her for this to work as you do this.
Well, her retirement lasted about 9 months. So she's back in a job that she's very well suited for, but very challenging and demanding, and it does require a little bit of travel. So, that gives us the ability that gives me the ability to really do things, associated with aviation, like come down to Texas and train for a few days where it's helpful, where we have a good client base, and it's not really taking anything away from us because she's got other things that she needs to be doing as well. She is not a naturally comfortable flyer. So her seat in our airplane is the rear right seat. She likes it back there. She can't see the panel, and then she's comfortable flying generally there.
Is she comfortable with you being an instructor?
She is comfortable with me being an instructor as long as I, let her know where I'm at, what I'm doing. So I typically let her know, here's where I'm at, here's where I'm going, and I let her know when I get there. And incidentally, what struck me, one person in my Army career struck me because before cell phones, after every flight we got done flying, the first thing he did was call his wife. Hi, honey, I'm home. And this was in a rapid deployment outfit. So, that wasn't always the hi, honey, I'm home kind of call wasn't always a given.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily going to happen every day.
Do you make that call now?
I do. Yeah. I text it. I let her know that I'm down, and she knows I love it. She knows that I don't approach it casually. But flying in general, I don't approach casually. It's something I have a passion for. It's something I've been gifted to have a lot of very talented people that have both instructed with me and that I've flown with throughout my life. Many of them in the military, so many of them not. And, all of those people have left something with me that I now, carry in my approach to flying. And so she's not worried about something that might happen to me or that I might do, but she is concern that, those things beyond your control could still happen.
Sure. I mean, it's aviation. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, that flight is only as safe as whoever's in that left front seat.
Hmm.
And in this case, whoever's in the right front seat, if you're good. In other words, that person in the left front seat's learning to be that pilot in command, learning to do this thing of flying a PA-46, and you're making sure that goes down. And so it's not inherently safe when you're doing engine failures and your more lever approaches and all the different things that can occur here. It is only safe because you make it so, and because you're good. You got to be on your A game.
Yeah, every day.
Today, well, actually, this last week, I flew with a whole bunch of different flights. And what was interesting about it is this has been a week where I've been tired. And I look back and I was like, I did a recurrent training plus another flight. And the next day I did 2 check rides. And I thought, all I did was sit in the right seat. I didn't really work that hard, but your brain is working a million miles an hour, playing the what if scenarios, even on approach. Is the airspeed right? Is this every little thing to make sure as you go around the pattern or go out in an approach or do whatever, that you're not putting the airplane in an unsafe position. And I think sometimes we can take that for granted. And when you do, well, that's when you're in trouble because somebody does something bonehead and here off we go into the wrong place.
Yeah, and the slippery side of that bubble is not always obvious. You get there, you can get there in a hurry. I have a very good friend of mine who was Army scuba. He was actually the scuba school doctor, but he told me something a long time ago when they were working on buddy nav, blacked out.
Yes.
The guy in front's primarily responsible for nav. Guy following is the guy responsible for making sure the nav goes, and he's the pace count guy, the distance guy. But the person who was in front, who was responsible for getting to the next checkpoint in time, under dark conditions, underwater, consumed twice as much oxygen as the person who was backup. And that, I think about that when I think about being in the right front seat. And if you're not consuming twice as much oxygen, metaphorically at least, then you need to reflect on how you can get more engaged in the process, because that's, to make the training realistic, we have to make it as close as possible to the real thing without getting on the slippery side of the bubble.
And if you look at it, I believe in simulators. There's a place for them. There's a good thing for them. There's not much of a good place in our particular space for an encompassing event. And the reason why is most of the simulators in our space are not ground contact available. No, you can't practice landings. You can't do things. You can practice an instrument approach or something like that, and that's good for that. But that's about all. Really, where the rubber hits the road, we have to do things like engine failures multiple times, more lever failures where you're approaching the runway with the control of the engine in a different manner.
Mhm.
Things that partial panel approaches, hardcore IMC. I mean, if it's 200 overcast and somebody comes in for training, we're going training because that's what you actually do in the world. So there's a lot of aspects of this where the brain really is working. It's churning hard to make sure that all this goes well.
Mhm.
And that's not easy. There are times where the brain just simply uses a lot of energy, a lot of oxygen in that case. I'm glad you told that story about that scuba because that's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
The pilot in command is definitely burning more oxygen.
Yeah. And it's our job to stay ahead to help. We're of no use if we can't get to that state, but do it in a way that prevents something bad from happening.
Would you rather do an initial training, 4 days, or would you rather do 4 recurrent trainings?
I enjoy the initial trainings a lot. They're a lot of work, but in many ways, you have to plot a different course every time. I mean, you're starting from a much different point, and that journey in an initial training, you have a lot. For us as CFIs, we're crafting. There's one syllabus, but you have to apply that syllabus to different people, different experience level, maybe a different panel, so on. So you have a little more opportunity to create a very interesting journey that gets the job done, that, makes it more than just, well, I just need to check the box.
Right. Initial trainings to me are a lot of fun because there's newness and excitement, and the person learning, it's their first airplane like this, and you get to train them, take them from here to there.
And you're setting the tone.
You're setting the tone for everything that goes on.
Yeah.
And I will tell you the other part that is just, I see it every time, and that is that which is learned first leaves an unshakable impression.
Yep.
And when somebody gets really crappy training at the very beginning, they bring all that with them to whenever as they go. And it's so hard to get rid of that. It's actually a law of learning for a CFI is called primacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that what you learn first leaves an unshakable impression. I think I like initial trainings in the sense that you get to be that person to make that ever so important initial training, that initial action that person's learned. Everything from even from a hand position. If you were taught wrong about how to hold your hand on a meridian power lever at the very beginning, it's going to be so hard for you to control that airplane. But if you were taught at the very beginning, it's not a hard it's not a hard power lever to manage. But to retrain somebody to do it is very, very difficult. There's times where I'll take my stick and I won't hit them. I will not hit them. But I'll just tap the hand, like if they're grabbing with their hand on the top.
Yeah.
All I got to do is just tap my hand on top of that.
Yeah.
And they'll move it to the correct position, which is a hand up position where you're grounding your fingers. Exactly. So there's a way you do it, and there's a way you don't. And it's so hard to, and you can always see whenever when the chips are down, when the stress is up, you'll revert back to that first thing.
Yep.
And when you're the initial guy, you get to be able to do it. So,
I agree.
Recurrent trainings to me are always fun because they're what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for drift. In other words, you were taught this way at the beginning, and you started doing it this way just because of what? Now, usually I'm so inquisitive as to, did you talk to some King Air pilot or some Citation pilot who said, well, you got to do it this way? And no, that's crazy. You don't need to do it that way. Not in this airplane. So I'm looking for drift. The other one I'm doing is looking for gaps in the training.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for, you were taught, because in initial training, there's no way to cover everything.
That's right.
You're not going to get everything. There's going to be gaps. And moreover, there's some things where you're taught, but they just didn't get it. The fire hydrant theory.
Splashed to the outside. Didn't go
exactly.
In.
Exactly. A whole bottle of water went by. I got as much as I could, but a whole bunch of, I missed a whole
missed
bunch
that
of,
part.
Missed that part. Right. And so sometimes you get to go back and figure out where those gaps are. And that's fun to me. So I'm looking for drift and I'm looking for gaps on recurrent training. And with some pilots, you find a lot of drift and a lot of gaps. Let me give you, for instance, this is going to be crazy, but I had somebody text me or email me just the other day that talked about, that basically said, hey, in a jet prop, you have to bring the NG up to 60% with the alternators to make sure that they're working good enough you don't hurt them. Where'd that come from? I've never heard that before in my life. And I've got, 3,000 hours of flying jet props on top of 10,000 hours flying PA-46. I've never heard, where'd that come from? And then it got to thinking, I bet I know where that came from. Because in a King Air, like a King Air 300, 350, you're going to move the condition lever up from low idle to high idle, making the generator turn faster, which then you can use for air conditioning. And there's a thing there of so somebody somewhere bumped the NG up, and then they turned into you have to. And now I've got a whole thing of people out there that are saying you got to have the NG up in a jet prop to be able to keep the alternator from failing. It's the point is drift.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of times pushing either a person, or if I see this repetitively over a series of people, pushing a community back into a place of, no, that's not how we do it. This is the way we do it. And recurrent trainings to me are fun for looking for that drift.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Talk to me about, let's go back to your military days.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a story. I I was in Delta Troop, 2nd and 17th Cav. You were in 2nd. Which troop were you
I
there?
was the Alpha Troop Commander.
There you go.
217.
Yeah, exactly. Talk to me. Pick one person. Tell me about somebody that had a big impact in your life.
Well, in that particular unit, there were several. I worked not a finer bunch of people that I got a chance to work with there. We did a lot of work at night under night vision goggles. I had a very diverse team within my troop. I had 3 or 4 warrant officers that were prior service from different a couple of them were Rangers. One was a commo specialist, one was a mortarman. And so when we would go out and do training and we would invent new ways. We went to one of the premier training centers in the country, Joint Readiness Training Center. You were probably there at the same time with us.
I went to JRTC 11 times.
Yeah, well, this was our favorite 217 commander. The other guy, we went with him, and I had our squadron tactical operations center could not talk to every unit in the operation when they were out in the maneuver box. But my troop talk could, because my warrant officer, CW2, rigged a field expedient antenna. I could talk to the length and breadth of the whole maneuver box. I would have people come to me to talk to helicopters that were way at the other end, because I had a guy, and I said, yeah, sure, good idea. See if it works. We were in the aircraft we had at the time. We didn't have Apaches. We had the H-1 Cobras and OH-58s, a Jet Ranger as a scout. And the movement, the way I trained my team was to stay low, because that was safer. And don't hover, don't follow the same track twice. Our job was to find things. Finding things on the ground at night is very difficult. But if you got to pass over a place twice, make sure you're low, make sure you're not hovering, and make sure you don't come at it the same way. And we were quite successful doing that. But one of the things that was difficult was if you did see something and needed to bring fire to it, from mortars or for indirect fire, how do you fix that point on the ground while you're moving, while you're flying, single pilot with an aerial observer at night under night vision goggles? Well, he was a brand new warrant, W1. He said, why don't we use what's called a polar call for fire? And it was basically a reference point that's visible like a hilltop, an azimuth, and a distance, which you could do. You see something on the ground, you see that point, and you could look at your compass, your EG, and you say, okay, that's 270, and it's about 3 kilometers. We were able to get a response to that in seconds, not minutes. And it was quite innovative and not my idea.
Right.
It was just a talent I had. It was grace to have in my organization at that time. And if I did anything, it was just to set the environment so that people would feel free to bring these things up and look at a problem and come up with a different way to solve it that was more efficient and better.
One of the things the Army does really, really well is the warrant officer. And there's 2 types of warrant officers. There's the prior service warrant officer that almost always is somebody that's just incredible in terms of their background. They were the tip of the spear in their enlisted field, meaning that they were an enlisted person, enlisted soldier, and they did whatever. But whatever it is, they rose to the top of that. And then they, saw a helicopter and thought, that's pretty cool. And if you're a grunt or an infantry guy or a special force, you go out to the field for 30 days and don't take a shower for 30 days.
I think I'd rather be up there.
And then the helicopter comes and picks you up, and you smell this waft of cologne coming from the front, and find out that, hey, what were y'all doing last night? Well, we were at the thing watching movies, and hey, how do I do what you do? And it turns out that these guys, this being a helicopter pilot in the Army, not a bad gig. And they find out that you can be a warrant officer. And that's one way. The other one's called high school to flight school. I was high school to flight school. is what we called it. In other words, I came to, we usually go to college. It's not high school, but you go to, basically you come out of there, you get a 4-year degree or a pretty good education. And now you go in and apply and you get in. So, but either way, you're either educated civilian wise or you're tip of the spear military without a college education, and you can get into the cockpit of a Army helicopter.
Yeah.
And that's why, but the Army's so smart in this sense, because really what you talked about was the excellence that came from this prior service person that brought this training, cross-pollinated it into your unit and made your unit better, made you look better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that was just one example. One of the finest people, best trainers, best pilots was a guy that I served with in a different unit at Fort Campbell that came from high school, essentially, to flight school. And I think it takes a little bit of everything in order to really make a strong, iron by itself is not particularly strong. You mix it with a bunch of stuff and it becomes steel. And it's very strong and durable and can be forged, and you make excellent tools out of them. This particular individual absorbed everything the Army gave him in flight school, and he understood it and became a professional. And then he became a trainer. But I think it was the youthful brain and enthusiasm and the longevity he had as a result of that. He spent more time in the aviation field in the Army than the prior service guys did, because their career was curtailed by 5 to 10 years, depending upon when they made that transition. So
Army's pretty.
We could stay and spend a lot of time. I could tell you all the good things that I was given, or knowledge that was transferred by these people. We'd be here all night and most of tomorrow.
Right. And here's the point behind the whole thing. To be a good PA-46 instructor, what's it take? And the idea is you take this past, whatever this past, and you bring the excellence of that past, you bring the knowledge that comes with it, whether it's for you, it was OH-58s and Cobras, totally different mission than mine as a Black Hawk, even though same unit, very different in that respect. I had different experiences where with the mission I had, you had different mission. You went business world, I went airline, and then came into the PA-46 world. We both end up back in this space of the PA-46 world. The idea is we don't leave behind what we did.
Yeah.
We bring this perspective in, and when we get a client, all of a sudden we get to bring in stories and things that are from other places that are very applicable to what we've got going on. And hopefully some maturity and hopefully some knowledge and hopefully all these things that really, because really what we're in the business of is taking people that are good pilots, that are solid, and we're transitioning them into a PA-46 pilot. And or taking a PA-46 pilot that's good and making them better.
Yep.
And that's our business. To me, I've always been a trainer at heart. No matter what I do, I always end up assimilating into some kind of a teacher role. And I find that fun and interesting. So when I got into this space, it was like, hey, this is a crowd that needs me. Meaning that they're new to the airframe. They're usually youthful in terms of their hours. They don't have the flight experience I've got. And I'm able to pour into them. And I find that to be a bunch of fun. And I think it's cool that, I became a flight instructor back in 1991. So I'm, looking at 34 years of being a flight instructor. You're looking at
3.4.
Yeah. But the point behind the whole thing is we're both doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We're both bringing excellence to the table and people are helped. I just think it's cool. If there's anybody out there that wants to be a PA-46 instructor, this is a cool place.
It is.
I'm telling you, if you go down one airplane down, okay, and in other words, you move down, and I know what that is because a lot of people move up from there, and it's going to be the Bonanza and the Cirrus community. All right, a whole lot of people running around Saratogas, Bonanzas, and Cirrus, SR-22s type things, and they come into our space. If you go be an instructor in that community, it's good, it's fine, it's great. It's difficult to make a career doing it in there because there's not an insurance mandate and there's not the money, the level of the airplane's not high enough to be able to really make a career out of it. If you move up out of our space. And again, you move, and TBM's kind of where the same place we are, highly owner flown in the PA-46 and TBM community. When you go into King Air citation and on, you move very quickly into a professionally flown environment where the pilots are pros. They do it every day. They're a little boring if I'm being really honest, because they're that's all they do, and they don't need me as much, if that makes sense.
Yep.
This little space that I'm in with the PA-46, the TBM, and King Air world, and really the King Air lesser, about probably 70% to 80% of the King Air world's professionally flown, but there are the probably 20 to 30%, it's my guess at all, entirely, that of the King Air world that are owner flown, lower hours that need me, that need us, that need people like us. This is you talk about such a cool space to be in. And my point behind this, and I hope that people come from this, that you can be a longtime instructor like me and come into here and have a great time and a great career. You can also be a guy that comes into your third career.
Yeah.
And joins the party later in the life, later in the game, and still have tremendous impact.
There is a term that was used for warrant officers and officers in the Army, since you cast me back to that. But it's actually 4 words: teacher, trainer, mentor, coach. And those were kind of, 4 words were used together, and they were sort of cast as an expectation. And so if that's your mentality in life, and you are thinking about, you enjoy that, whether it's your children's soccer, whether it's Sunday school, but if you kind of resonate with teacher, trainer, mentor, coach, then being a PA-46 instructor might be a good thing to try to do.
Well said. If you're interested in being the PA-46 instructor, give me a ring. I'd love to help you do this. PMOPA recently came up with an MSIP instructor program that helps people get into the PA-46 cadre of instructors. If you're thinking about that, this would be a wonderful time for you to join PMOPA, come in, align with the MSIP program that's out there now, and become a PA-46 instructor. I'd love to see you help. This is a space full of really cool people that buy airplanes, and really cool other instructors like Darwin Haines. Thanks for joining the Malibu Guru podcast.
My pleasure.